Gabriela Silang is the first Filipina to lead an uprising against foreign oppressors. Her relentless fight for the independence of Ilocos will never be forgotten. Recognized as the mother of the revolution, Melchora Aquino, or Tandang Sora, took care of the Katipuneros during the war. She helped cure the wounded, despite the threat of Spaniards to people who connive with rebels. Known as the Joan of Arc of the Philippines, Teresa Magbanwa is the first woman to lead troops in the Visayas. Her successful leadership was vital in the liberation of Iloilo City. Cheers to all the phenomenal women who dedicated their lives for the love of their country.
Noon pa man, malaki na ang naging bahagi ng mga kababaihan sa lipunang Pilipino. Kaisa sila sa marubdob na paghahangad ng kalayaan ng ating lahi. Kabilang sila sa paglinang ng ating makulay na sining at mayamang kultura. Kasapi sila sa pagtataguyod ng mga adhikain ng kapwa mamamayan at sa pagtugon sa mga pangangailangan ng lipunan. Katuwang sila sa pagtuklas sa mga larangan ng agham at medisina. Kapanalig sila sa pagpapairal ng batas, karapatan at katarungan para sa lahat. Kabahagi sila sa paglilingkod sa bayan at sa pagpapanatili ng demokrasyang Pilipino. Sa paglipas ng panahon, hindi nagmaliw ang kanilang pag-ibig sa ating inang bayan.
I'd like to invite everyone to please rise and join us in singing of the Philippine National Anthem, which will be immediately followed by our prayer.
Kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, helas ng sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng mag-ibig, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatak tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng pagaw, ay ginatang tula, tawid sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iibig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di mag-iibig. Lumang ang araw ng walhagit pagsinta, mo'y langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mga not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the kingdom and power and glory, the kingdom and power and glory forever.
Panginoon, sa gitna ng pagkalito at takot na bumabagabag sa amin, balutin ninyo kami ng yakap ng inyong pagmamahal at proteksyon. Palakasin po ninyo ang aming mga katawan. Patuloy na patnubayan ang aming pamilya at mga mahal sa buhay. Tulungan at gabayan po ninyo ang aming mga lider sa kanilang mga desisyon. Pagkalooban ninyo ng lakas ang mga frontliners sa kanilang pagsugpo at pagharap sa karamdamang ito. Aming Ama na pinagmumula ng aming kalakasan, kayo po ang magkaloob ng kagalingan sa lahat ng patuloy na lumalaban sa sakit na ito. Kayo po ang aming sandigan at takbuhan. Sa inyo po ang aming buong pagtitiwala. Dahil alam naming sa gitna ng krisis na ito, hindi ninyo kami pababayaan.
Welcome to Bayani'Han, Kuwentuhan ng Kabayanihan as a part of the Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series 2021. I am Nico Orero.
And I am Maggie Grace Sahagun. We are your hosts for today. Before anything else, allow me to acknowledge the presence of the following: Department of National Defense Secretary, Sir Delphine N. Lorenzana, PVAO Administrator, Undersecretary Ernesto G. Carolina, PVAO Deputy Administrator, Raul V. Caballo, NHCP Executive Director, Mr. Restituto Aguilar, PVB Vice President, Mr. Mike Villarreal, Mount Samat FS Administrator, Mr. Francis Initorio, Dr. Neil Marshall Santillan from the University of the Philippines, Dr. Jose Romel B. Hernandez from De La Salle University, Dr. Archie B. Resos from the University of Santo Tomas, Professor Marlon F. Agoy-Agoy, MC from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Dr. Maria Bernadette L. Abrera, the Dean of College of Social Sciences and Philosophy of UP Diliman, Dr. Maria Luisa T. Camagay, Professor Emeritus of UP Department of History. Right now, we have about 45 participants here in Zoom. For those who were unable to pre-register, we are currently being broadcasted via Facebook Live on our official Facebook page of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office.
Now, before we officially begin our program, here are some reminders for all of us. In case there are any lags, just stay on and wait for it to load again. Zoom attendees are on mute to avoid background noises. If you have any questions, you may use the message box for Zoom attendees, or you may use the comment section for the Facebook live stream. After the webinar, the participants who registered in this webinar are encouraged to answer the evaluation form. The link will be sent on your email. Now, for those who have missed the third episode of our webinar series, which was held on March 25, here's a short recap of the discussion. Entitled Heroism and Valor, Symposium on the Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series, Dr. Ricardo T. Jose presented a lecture on the Balantang Memorial Cemetery National Shrine. And Dr. Ray Carlo T. Gonzalez gave us a glimpse of the life of Macario Peralta and the 6th Military District during the morning session. In the afternoon, Dr. Augusto V. De Viana retold the history behind the prestigious Mount Samat National Shrine. And NHCP Executive Director Restituto L. Aguilar delivered his presentation on the Filipino World War II veteran recognition. For those of you who wish to watch the third episode of our webinar series, the recorded version may still be viewed at the official Facebook page of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office.
In celebration of the 2021 National Women's Month, and in partnership with the University of the Philippines, Diliman, the episode today will focus on the stories of heroism made by Filipino women in our country's history of war and peace. The lineup of resource speakers for this episode include Assistant Professor Dondy Pepito G. Ramos II, who will share the story of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, Assistant Professor Francis Justine M. Malban. He will be discussing the life of Maria Orosa. And finally, Assistant Professor Francisco Jayme Paolo A. Guiang. He will be presenting to us the life of Bayhadja Fatima Matabay Blanc.
So without further ado, let us begin our program with an opening message from the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, UP Diliman, Dr. Maria Bernadette L. Abrera.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to open this webinar of the UP Department of History with the active support and collaboration of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office. The theme is in heroism during that period in our history in World War II when the Japanese occupied our country during its territorial expansion in order to sustain its industrial base. That would provide the historical backdrop to the heroism that would unfold in the extensive Philippine resistance to Japanese occupation and would lead to the immediate post-war phenomenon of the report of a 1948 Marian apparition in Lipa, where the Blessed Virgin Mary is quoted to have called on Filipinos to pray against the expansionist dreams of China, among other messages. That period of struggle for freedom against the Japanese was a continuation of the country's struggle for independence. Women had been part of this march towards freedom and self-determination from the Spanish and American colonial periods. During the Japanese occupation, the guerrilla resistance counted women among their ranks. We are told that 1 in 10 guerrillas was a woman. There were combatants in the field, medics, auxiliaries, there were spies, there were countless women who supported the resistance against the Japanese. The women guerrillas trained in weapons. They were in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. There were those who distinguished themselves in the battlefield, such as the Hukbalahap Commander Liwayway, who did not retreat despite overwhelming numbers of Japanese. Like the women of the revolution, they contributed their financial resources. They came from various walks of life, and they were active where they found themselves during the war. Josefa Llanes Escoda, for example, continued her social work and used it to help the resistance movement, smuggling messages and relief goods. Josefina Guerrero suffered from Hansen's disease, which she turned into a formidable weapon to transmit messages, information, and weapons to various guerrilla groups. The women suffered and endured alongside their husbands, fathers, brothers, sons. They gathered and brought supplies of medicine, food, clothing. They endured hunger, tiredness, disease, lack of water. They suffered more seeing their young children killed right before their eyes. They gave up their lives as well. It was not only in the battlefield but in the home front where their heroism was manifest. Wives were left home with their children, whom they had to feed and shelter. They confronted and defied Japanese soldiers and pleaded for the jailed guerrillas. In other words, women were as involved as the men in the struggle for freedom in all the areas of life, from the home to the battlefield. Nation building is indeed the work of all its citizens, men and women alike. The complementarity of their roles was once more affirmed, as it had been during the Revolution, during peacetime, during war. Their stories are now coming to light, and as we discover their courage, we celebrate their heroism and honor their memories. We have 3 such women this afternoon. Congratulations to the UP-CSSP Department of History on this webinar, and to its partner, the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, for continuously reminding us that our freedom is the legacy of the women and men who fought for it through various methods, through various periods in our history, and will continue to safeguard our inheritance of freedom and heroism. Mabuhay!
Welcoming message.
This time, let us have the Administrator of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, Undersecretary Ernesto G. Carolina, to provide us with his message for today's program. It will then be followed by another message from the Deputy Administrator of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, Asst. Raul D. Caballo.
Sa ating mga manunood, mga historians, mga professor, at sa mga tagapagsalaysay sa araw na ito, sa magandang araw sa ating lahat. Labis kong ikinagagalak na maibahagi sa inyo ang episode na ito ng ating Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series 2021. Sa pakikipagtulungan ng pamantasan ng Pilipinas, sa Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, nihahandog natin ngayong hapon ang programang tatalakay sa mga natatanging kwento ng ating mga kababaihan sa kasaysayan ng ating bansa. Kasabay ng ating pagdiriwang sa buwan ng kababaihan ngayong Marso. Sa mga aklat o babasahin tungkol sa ating kasaysayan na mayroon tayo sa kasalukuyan, ilan lamang sa kanila ang naiakda mismo ng kapwa natin Pilipino. At sa iilang mga babasahing ito, halos mabibilang lamang sa mga daliri ng ating kamay ang tumatalakay sa naging kontribusyon at ambag ng mga kababaihan. Nakakalungkot mang isipin, ngunit hindi maikakaila na hindi masyadong nabibigyang diin at kahalagahan ang mga ito. Kaya naman bilang isang ahensya na naatasan sa pagpreserba at pagpapalawig ng kwento ng ating mga bayani, nais namin gamitin ang pagkakataong ito upang ating kilalanin ang mga piling kababaihan ng ating kasaysayan na bumago sa takbo nito. Ang mga natatanging kababaihan na ating itatampok ngayong araw ay hindi lamang nakilala dahil sa kanilang dunong at kakayahan sa kanilang larangan. Sila rin ay nagpamalas ng tapang at wagas na pagmamahal sa bayan at sa kanilang kapwa Pilipino. Ginamit nila ang kanilang pagkadalubhasa upang tumulong sa kabila ng panganib at banta sa kanilang buhay. Ang kanilang kwento ng giting at kabayanihan ang dahilan kung bakit tayo ngayon ay malaya sa kamay ng mga mapagsamantalang dayuhan. Nawa ay sa pamamagitan ng webinar series na ito ay mapagtagumpayan nating maipakilala ang kwento ng ating mga babaeng bayani. Kami ay naniniwala na sa ganitong paraan ay unti-unti nating mahuhubog ang pananaw ng nakararami sa papel na ginagampanan ng mga kababaihan sa ating lipunan. Bago ako magtapos, nais kong pasalamatan ang mga naging punong abala upang maging matagumpay ang adhikaing ito. Nais ko ring pasalamatan ang mga tagapagsalaysay na siyang gagabay sa ating pagtalakay ngayong hapon. At higit sa lahat, ang ating katuwang na universidad, ang Pamantasan ng Pilipinas. Muli, kinagagalak namin kayong makasama sa isa na namang produktibo at makabuluhang talakayan. Maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Bago ang lahat, nais naming ipahayag ang aming lubos na pagkalugod sa patuloy ninyong pagsubaybay sa ating Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series. Sa mga nagdaang talakayan, ating mapapatunayan na tunay ngang napakayaman at makulay ang ating kasaysayan. Gayunpaman, malaking bahagi pa rin ito ang hindi pa natin lubos na nalalaman. Ngayong araw, ating bibigyang liwanag ang isang bahagi ng ating kasaysayan na bahagya lamang matalakay, ang ating mga babaeng bayani. Bilang pagpupugay sa ating mga kababaihan, ngayong buwan ng Marso, tayo ay magbalik tanaw at kilalanin din ang mga babaeng bayaning nagbuwis ng kanilang buhay para sa ating bayan. Lingid sa kalaman ng nakararami, marami sa ating mga sinaunang kababaihan ang mas piniling iwan ang mas ligtas at tahimik na pamumuhay upang ipaglaban ang kasarinlan ng bayan. Gaya ng mga kilalang bayaning lalaki, ang mga kababaihang ito ay nagpakita ng tapang at wagas na pagmamahal sa bayan. Sila ay nanindigan sa kanilang paniniwala dahil naiintindihan nila na ang kanilang sakripisyo ang maaaring bumago sa kinabubukasan ng nakararami. Isa itong patunay na ang pagsisilbi sa bayan ay walang pinipiling edad, antas sa buhay o kasarian. Ngunit higit sa lahat, ipinakikita ng mga kwentong ito na ang pagmamahal sa bayan at kapwa ang siyang bubuklod sa atin bilang isang bansa, maging ano paman ang ating kasarian. Ang tapang, kabayanihan at pag-ibig para sa kapwa na siyang ipinamalas ng mga kababaihang ito ang siyang nais namin ibahagi sa ating mga manonood sa pamamagitan ng ating webinar episode. Nawa ay gawin nating inspirasyon ang mga kababaihang ito, lalo na sa panahong umaharap ang ating bansa sa isang krisis na pangkasalukuyan. Nawa ang mga aral na mapupulot sa kanilang kwento ay tularan at isabuhay ng bawat isa, sapagkat sila ang ating magiging gabay patungo sa isang mas mapayapang kinabukasan. Maraming salamat, mabuhay ang mga kababaihan, mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Yusuf Carolina and Asst. Raul Caballas, for your messages, and of course, your continued support in the development of unveiling the heroic deeds of our Filipino women heroes.
To provide us now with an in-depth detail and information on the objective of today's episode, may we now have Mr. Aaron F. Viernes to share to us the story and the meaning behind the title Bayani'Han. Sir?
Isang makabuluhang araw sa ating lahat. Sa ngalan ng tagapangulo ng UP Departamento ng Kasaysayan na si Dr. Neil Marshall R. Santillan, malugod akong nagpapasalamat sa inyong pakikibahagi sa gawain ngayong hapon. Ang Bayanihan ang tawag sa serye ng mga kwentuhan hinggil sa iba't ibang larawan ng kabayanihan na itinaguyod ng Departamento ng Kasaysayan simula noong 2019. Halo ang katagang ito sa pinagsamang salitang kabayanihan at kwentuhan. Taglay rin nito ang salitang bayanihan na nangangahulugang pagsasama-sama o pagbubuklod-buklod tungo sa pagtamo ng isang layon. Kung lalagumin natin ang pagpapakahulugan ng katagang bayanihan, ipinapahiwatig nito ang pagbabahagi ng mga kwento ng kabayanihan na naglalayong maging kolektibo ang paggunita at pagpapahalaga sa papel na ginampanan at naging ambag ng mga bayani sa pagbuo ng isang makatarungan at mapagkalingang lipunan. Unang nailunsad ang bayanihan sa bukas pagdiriwang ng Buwan ng Kasaysayan sa UP Diliman noong Agosto 2019. Ito ay naging ambag ng pamantasan at departamento sa pagdiriwang ng Pambansang Araw ng mga Bayan. Itinampok sa nasabing gawain ang buhay at kabayanihan ng dalawang Pilipinong bayani na sina Remedios Gomez Paraiso o popular sa bansag na Commander Liwayway na naging leader guerrilla ng Hukbong Bayan laban sa Hapon o Hukbalhap. Kasama rin dito ang kwento ni Teresa Magbanwa na nagpamalas ng Kagitingan laban sa pananakop ng mga Kastila, Amerikano at Hapon. Matingkad na inilarawan ng dalawang ibinahaging kwento ang mga salaysay ng tagumpay at pag-asa ng kababaihan sa harap ng iba't ibang hamong pampulitika at panlipunan mula sa himagsikang Filipino hanggang sa pananakop ng mga Hapon. Makabuluhan din ang mga ito bilang artikulasyon ng paglaya at pagpapalaya mula sa tradisyonal na pananaw sa papel ng kababaihan sa lipunang Pilipino. Ngayong buwan, bilang bahagi ng pagdiriwang ng Buwan ng Kababaihan, inilulunsad muli ng Departamento ng Kasaysayan ang Bayanihan bilang bahagi ng Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series. Ibabahagi ngayong hapon ang buhay at kabayanihan ni Nicolasa Dairit Pandillo, Maria Orosa at Bay Hadja Fatima Matibay Plang. Katulad ng mga bayaning naitampok sa unang bayanihan, ang mga kwento ng kabayanihan na ibabahagi ngayon ay kasama sa kalipunan ng mga salaysay ng kabayanihan na produkto ng pananaliksik na pinamagatang Identity and Independence, Filipino Women in Times of War and Peace na pinangunahan ni Decano Maria Bernadette L. Abrera ng UP Diliman Kolehiyo ng Agham Panlipunan at Filosofiya sa pakipagtulungan pa rin ng PVAO. Hangad ko na maging produktibo ang gawain natin ngayong hapon. Muli, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang mga kababaihan.
Thank you very, very much for that, Sir Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you. So first in the lineup of our speakers for today is University of the Philippines History Professor, Assistant Professor Dondy Pepito G. Ramos II. Sir Dondy Pepito G. Ramos II is an assistant professor at the UP Department of History. He obtained his BA History degree and his Master's History degree from the UP Diliman. His research interests focus on biography and family history, local history, and public history. Ladies and gentlemen, Assistant Professor Dondy Pepito Ramos II.
Good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon po sa lahat. First, I would like to thank the UP Department of History and the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office for hosting and spearheading this event in celebration of the Women's Month. I am Dondy Ramos, part of the UP Department of History, and for today, I am going to share the story of heroism and legacy of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. And this particular story of heroism is very close to my heart because Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio hailed from Pampanga, where I am also from. So for my presentation, I will focus on three main points regarding the life of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. Yung nakikita niyo pong picture ngayon ay isa sa mga well-known photograph ni Doña Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. So first, I will talk about her personal background, her early life, and her family life also. And then I'll talk about her heroism. So basically, we'll answer the question, what makes her a hero? Bakit siya tinatanghal bilang bayani ng panahon niya? And then, the lingering legacy of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. Let's start. So if you happen to visit, for example, San Fernando, Pampanga every September 10, every year, you'll see that the local government unit of San Fernando celebrates Women's Day every September 10 of every year, which is almost 5 months behind the country's Women's Month celebration during March. Basically, the Women's Week celebration of San Fernando coincides with the birthday of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, one of Pampanga's most celebrated women heroes. The celebration of San Fernando's Women's Week is a way of paying homage to Dairit Panlilio. So meaning to say, the San Fernando LGU is actually celebrating Women's Day twice every year. One every March 8 and the other one every September 10, kapag birthday ni Doña Nicolasa. Doña Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, as I've said, was born on September 10, 1874. Her father was Don Florentino Dairit and her mother was Doña Antonia Pamintuan. Both her parents' family came from well-off and landed elites in Pampanga. So if you happen to familiarize yourselves, for example, with the landed elites of Pampanga, yung mga Dairit and Pamintuan, relatives ni Doña Antonia Pamintuan halimbawa, some of them were the founders of Kulia, which would later on become the present-day Angeles City. Kaya meron tayong Pamintuan Mansion. So doon yung pamilya na pinanggagalingan. Yun yung economic background. And according to John Larkin in his book, Sugar and the Origins of Modern Philippine Society, the father of Nicolasa, Don Florentino Dairit, no, meron siya sa kanyang last will testament na asset na nagkakahalaga ng 176,000 pesos. And if you're going to compare that, for example, to the richest man or to the very rich person in Cavite during that time, 50,000 lang yung asset ng isang mayamang taga Cavite. So by that particular comparison, mayaman talaga at merong well-off yung pinanggagalingan na context ni Doña Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. Don Florentino Dairit, her father, also served as a cabeza de barangay in the Spanish colonial government. Her family background as local elites in Pampanga was passed down to Nicolasa. She was one of the well-educated women of her time in her particular community also. Her early education was secured from a certain Don Modesto Joaquin. So si Don Modesto Joaquin ay meron siyang private school na pinapatakbo sa Bacolor, Pampanga. It's where Nicolasa secured her early education. And during that time, yung pagkatuto din ng Spanish language is not available to everyone, basically. And she was well-versed in the Spanish language, and she was a well-known pianist during her time. So educated, fluent in Spanish, and she was also an accomplished pianist. If you're familiar with Eyewitness, they actually produced a documentary hosted by J. Taruk, and the title is Casa Nicolasa. It touches some of the historical background regarding the heritage house of the Dairit Panlilio family in San Fernando, Pampanga. But it was actually November 1 episode. So some of the caretakers, sinasabi nila na nakikita daw nila yung ghost or yung si Doña Nicolasa na nagpi-play doon sa kanyang piano na nandoon pa sa bahay na yon hanggang ngayon. No? Aside from that, no, makikita natin that Doña Nicolasa did not only play a vital role in the political events of our country, but also she contributed significantly to its cultural development. Kasi nga pinag-aaralan niya yung wika at saka yung piano. She was a very well-known pianist during her time. Later on, she married a Western-educated doctor named Vicente Panlilio, whom she had 5 children. So nagkaroon siya ng 5 anak with Dr. Panlilio. Sa the Dairit Panlilio family, so yung pamilya na nila Nicolasa ito, they initially stayed in Pampanga, but they later on moved to Malate in Manila after the Second World War destroyed their original home. So nasira yung kanilang bahay. It is also in Pampanga where Nicolasa witnessed turning points that changed the history of the Philippine nation. Makikita mo that the family of the husband, Dr. Vicente Panlilio, was actually a well-off family also in Pampanga. He came from the Henson Panlilio side, and he also served as a director of Pasodeco, or the Pampanga Sugar Development Company, one of the largest sugar development company in Pampanga during that time. And so, makikita natin that Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio was born in the latter part of the 19th century. At ano ang implications nito sa kanyang buhay? So, being born in the latter part of the 19th century means witnessing the birth of the Philippine nation. So, nasa tail end siya ng Spanish colonial period. And that period proved to be a challenging period for all the Filipinos and the Spanish Empire. They are faced with a challenge to be part of the creation of the Philippine nation. And Nicolasa took up the challenge and participated in the 1896 revolution against Spain as a non-combatant. Some historical accounts suggest that she was part of the group responsible for the creation of the flag of the Kapampangan Revolutionaries. That's why you'll see on your screen, merong monument, may bust si Nicolasa sa San Fernando nakalagay yan, malapit dun sa kanilang heritage house, na hawak niya yung flag ng Kapampangan Revolutionaries. Kasi isa siya dun sa nagtahi ng flag ng Kapampangan Revolutionaries. Although she played a vital role in the creation of the Kapampangan Revolutionary flag, most accounts would actually point to her being the quote-unquote peacemaker during the revolution. Ang tanong, bakit siya tinawag na peacemaker? So in order for us to uncover her actual participation, bakit siya tinawag na peacemaker, let us go back. Backtrack tayo. Tignan natin ano yung nangyari doon sa context ng panahon na yon, no? In 1899, we all know that days before the ratification of the Treaty of Paris by the United States Congress, war broke out between the forces of then President Emilio Aguinaldo and the Americans in the Philippines. The war came to be known in Philippine history as the Filipino-American War, which lasted officially until 1902. General Antonio Luna, a Western-educated Filipino middle class, directed all the military operations during the war. General Luna is known among his peers as being you happen to read, for example, the account of Don Jose Alejandrino, General Jose Alejandrino, who is also a Kapampangan. Meron siyang account sa pagiging mainitin daw ng ulo ni General Luna, kahit nung nandun pa sila sa Espanya. By the time the revolutionary headquarters moved to Central Luzon, kasi di ba nag-move yung revolutionary headquarters, a confrontation occurred between General Antonio Luna and Tomas Mascardo. And this, I think this is very familiar, lalo na sa mga nakapanood ng movie na General Luna. However, merong kulang doon sa movie, no? Hindi nabanggit yung participation ni Nicolasa. As the commander of the Central Luzon Command, Luna, whose headquarters is in Kalumpit, Bulacan, so malapit lang ito sa Pampanga, ordered the forces of Tomas Mascardo in Guagua, Pampanga to prepare for the impending attacks of the American forces. However, it came to the knowledge of General Antonio Luna that Mascardo left for Arayat. So umalis si Mascardo imbis na maghanda para sa pumunta ng Arayat. Sinasabi ng iba na pumunta siya ng Arayat in order to attend a party para daw makipag-fiesta siya. Sinasabi naman ng iba na pumunta siya doon sa area na yon dahil siya ay merong nililigawan na babae. No? Imbis na mag-prepare, iba yung inatupag niya. So, ang nangyari, nalaman ito ni General Luna, and that irked General Luna. Uminit yung ulo niya. So, nagpadala ng telegram si Luna patungo kay Mascardo in order to instruct him to go back to his headquarters. Okay? Aside from that, Luna also reprimanded Mascardo for his actions. However, hindi sumunod si General Mascardo doon sa mga request ni Luna, and that further enraged the general. So merong growing enmity between the two. And this is very crucial because this enmity might just result, for example, to the collapse of the revolutionary forces, something that they cannot afford during that time. So the succeeding actions of General Luna actually proved to be crucial for his career because we all know what would happen later on. And the governor of Pampanga during that time was Tiburcio Hilario. So si General Luna, he instructed Governor Tiburcio Hilario to prepare for his arrival in Pampanga. So mula Kalumpit, Bulacan, pupunta siya ng Pampanga para personally i-reprimand si General Mascardo. In the face of a modern and well-armed military of the United States, unity is an important element among the Filipino revolutionary forces. Governor Tiburcio Hilario knew that. So alam ni Governor Hilario yon. So he persuaded General Mascardo to submit to the authority of Luna while also persuading General Luna not to engage with Mascardo. So kinausap niya yung dalawa, wag na kayong mag-away, no? So pagdating ni Luna sa Pampanga, he told Governor Hilario that he will heed to his suggestion. So sige, I will take notice of your suggestion, sasang-ayon ako sa suggestion mo, pero meron ako request. And what was that request? So he requested for a delegation of women to be sent to him para siya ay bigyan ng flowers. So magpapunta ka dito ng delegation of women para magpadala sa akin ng bulaklak. And the delegation of women that was requested by General Luna was headed by Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio and the head of Pampanga Cruz Roja or the present-day Red Cross, Praxedes Fajardo. So si Praxedes Fajardo, head ng Cruz Roja, and si Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, sila yung matapang na babae na humarap kay General Luna para i-pacify yung kanyang mainit na ulo during that time. Sila yung pumunta doon sa Bacolor Convent. So the delegation was headed by Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio and Praxedes Fajardo. And I think it's also important that I give a little background. Sino ba tong si Praxedes Fajardo? Kasi mahalaga din yung role na pinlay niya doon sa heroism ni Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. So si Praxedes Fajardo was born on 21 July 1874 and she hailed from a distinguished and cultured family in Pampanga. Her parents were Justino Fajardo and Andrea Puno. Her father, Justino, was a cabeza de barangay. She is known to be orderly and systematic in her work as the provincial president of the Cruz Roja. She was also able to rally the support of some strong, influential, and wealthy Kapampangan women during that time. The two strong-willed women, si Nicolasa and si Praxedes, going back to the story, they met General Antonio Luna at the steps of Bacolor Convent on April 24, 1899, and they gave him flowers. Nicolasa took the lead in dissuading the feisty general from violently confronting General Mascardo. Si General Luna, he listened to the pleadings of Nicolasa, and in that crucial moment, the unity among the revolutionaries was maintained. It was preserved. Now, according to some accounts, si Nicolasa, noong binigay niya yung flowers at saka noong nakiusap siya kay General Luna, siya ay lumuhod sa harap nito, no, habang siya ay nakikipag-usap sa kanya. And some would also attribute, sasabihin din ng iba, dahil sa particular event na yan, dahil sa katapangan ni Nicolasa na i-dissuade at pumunta kay General Luna para pakiusapan siya, ay na-preserve ng mas matagal pa na panahon yung unity ng revolutionary forces. Otherwise, kung hindi nangyari yon, kung hindi ginawa ni Nicolasa yon, there's a possibility, or the possibility was real, that the revolutionary forces would collapse sooner than later. Okay? So, aside from that, whenever we talk about Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, at kung titignan mo yung mga naisulat sa kanya na articles online, na mga newspaper articles or mga nakalagay sa City of San Fernando local government unit, they almost always point to her being the peacemaker of the revolution. But we have to understand that the participation of Nicolasa is beyond that. No, higit pa doon yung naging participation niya doon sa revolution and then later on yung Filipino-American War. Ano pa yung kanyang participation? So the participation of Nicolasa did not only last during the early part of the Filipino-American War but until its end, and she continued to help the wounded and the sick during the war. She was part of what we call as La Junta Patriotica de San Fernando. Makikita sa slide, ito yung ilan sa mga kababaihan na members no, ng La Junta Patriotica de San Fernando. Kasama dyan si Nicolasa Dairit, si Praxedes Fajardo, Marcelino Lemjuco, Encarnacion Singian, Consolacion Singian, si Felisa Dairit, and Felisa Hizon. Okay? So, anong ginawa nila? Basically, they help collect clothings, food, no, and nurse the wounded combatants and their families during the war. And that is very heroic, particularly sa context ng mga kababaihan na ito. Dahil nanggagaling sila sa, well-off family, wealthy na pamilya. They do not actually need to do that. Kasi sila ay well-off naman. No? They have something to lose sa revolution na ito. And yet, they went out of their comfort zone and they helped for the cause of the revolution. Okay? Aside from that, the actions of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio also had long-lasting effects personally on her body. No, this participation in ministering the sick and the wounded took its toll on Nicolasa's body. So dahil doon siguro nakakatch siya ng mga sakit, no, na hindi rin nakatulong sa kanyang katawan. She became ill and a lot of doctors attempted to treat her. So marami, no? A young doctor who just graduated from Madrid was suggested to the family of Nicolasa. And that was Dr. Vicente Panlilio. So that's the story behind naman, paano niya nakilala. Later on, she married Dr. Panlilio and they built their own home in San Fernando, Pampanga. Soon after the Second World War broke out and the Japanese invaded the Philippines, Manila was declared an open city and the Japanese forces advanced to the Kapampangan region. Yung bahay ni Nicolasa ay inoccupy ng ilang mga Japanese forces and later on some parts of it was destroyed. And that destruction that was caused by the war forced the family of Nicolasa to move to Malate in Manila. Yung binanggit ko kaninang simula. And then later on, magkakaroon ng campaign to liberate Manila. And that resulted to the death or in the death of Dr. Panlilio. So the death of Dr. Panlilio, the husband, no, proved to be detrimental also to the health of Nicolasa. Kasi nagde-deteriorate na nga yung health niya noon pa lang dahil sa pagtulong sa revolution. So too much sadness and anxiety led to the death of Nicolasa on April 12, 1945. And she did not live to see the end of the American colonization of the Philippines na dinabanan niya nung simula. Nicolasa's remains were buried in Parañaque. And on September 9, 2004, her remains were reinterred from Sucat, Parañaque to San Fernando, Pampanga. So basically, nagkaroon ng hero's welcome actually noong 2004. She was given full military honors with members of the Marines serving as her honor guards for an overnight vigil. 2 years later, the National Historical Institute placed a marker on her statue. Okay? So, ano pa yung legacy niya? Ano pa yung lingering legacy niya? Bukod doon sa ginawang pag-transfer nung kanyang at saka hero's welcome sa kanyang labi sa Pampanga. Kita mo, no? Because of her, the province of Pampanga celebrates Women's Day twice annually. September 10 and March 8. And aside from that, a competition was held na para bumuo ng isang children's book in honor of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. And the winner of that book was Nancy Tolentino, a teacher. Ang kanyang pamagat ay Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio in Bayaning Fernandino. So it's in Kapampangan. And it was launched in 2012. Nung legacy ni, continuing legacy ni, or yung historical na relevance ni Nicolasa ay hanggang ngayon bahagi ng curriculum ng elementary children sa Pampanga, yung pag-aaral ng buhay kabayanihan ni Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio, yung kanyang ginawang tulong during the Revolution. And ang ginagamit nila na reference ay yung libro na binanggit ko, ang children's book siya, na 12 pages. Aside from that, the ancestral house of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio and her family was preserved at ngayon ay hindi pa naman siya fully converted, no? Basta heritage house siya, but not yet fully converted into a museum. But tourists can actually visit the house. Hindi ko lang alam ngayon dahil sa restrictions because of the ongoing pandemic. And it is called Casa Nicolasa, named after her. And then sa tabi ng bahay na yan ay merong statue, si Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. Aside from that, makikita mo sa loob yung mga pictures niya at yung mga gamit, no, yung rocking chair niya, yung piano niya. Nais ko sanang pakita yung mga pictures at pumunta doon, but because of the surging cases ng COVID, hindi na ako nakapunta. No? So those are that is the story and legacy of Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio. Why was she considered a hero? Because she went beyond her comfortable life to be an active part of the revolution and the birth of the Filipino nation. Her achievements, activities, and perseverance alone must command our respect. And they were quite a feat during a time when women's roles were merely reduced to being at home or in the church. So yun lamang po at maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Sir Dondy, for sharing our Filipino hero, Ma'am Nicolasa Dairit Panlilio.
And now for our second speaker, we have Assistant Professor Francis Justine M. Malban. Dr. Francis Justine M. Malban is an assistant professor at the UP Department of History. He obtained his BA History degree and MA History degree from UP Diliman. His research interests focus on the history of mental health during the colonial period. Again, here is Mr. Francis Justine M. Malban.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. No, para po sa hapong ito, ako po si Francis Justine M. Malban mula sa UP Department of History ay magbabahagi no, patungkol sa buhay ni Maria Y. Orosa. No, so sino nga ba si Maria Ilagan Orosa? No, so konting background lang about this this project no, that we're doing with PVAO. No, kasi meron kaming book project na ginagawa kasama sila. And Maria Orosa was actually assigned to me. No, and I had to write a short biography no, about her. And of all the women that were assigned to me, I think siya yung pinakaswak doon sa pinaka-interest, para sa akin, no, siya yung pinaka-interesting yung buhay. Dahil when you talk about heroism, no, when you talk about nationalism, no, yung pagmamahal sa bayan, pagiging makabayan, usually you have a discourse no, regarding its expression. No? Palaging sinasabi, kapag ikaw ay bayani, ano ba yung mga dapat na nagagawa mo? Some people will argue that heroes are public servants. No, may magsasabi na yung mga bayani, sila ay nagsisilbi sa bayan, ina-advance nila yung welfare ng kanilang mga kapwa Pilipino. Meron ding mga tao na magsasabi sa atin na yung heroism ay pinapakita na sa pamamagitan ng pakikipaglaban sa digmaan. And for me, Maria Ilagan Orosa, she's a very interesting personality because she was able to do all of those. No, kumbaga, she checks all of the boxes. No? So, in a nutshell, itong si Maria Ilagan Orosa, no, na nabuhay mula 1892 to 1945, she was a food technologist. She was also a chemist, pharmacist, an educator, a public servant, a champion of women's rights, and of course, she was also a war hero. So indeed, the life of Maria Ilagan Orosa was very colorful. That's why I really enjoyed writing her biography. And sa pagtatapos nung pagsusulat ko ng kanyang buhay, no, doon ko na-realize na dapat mas marami pang mga Pilipino, lalong-lalo na yung mga kabataan, yung makaalam tungkol doon sa kanyang naging buhay dahil talagang maituturing natin siya na isang bayani, no, sa iba't ibang sense, no, katulad ng binanggit natin kanina. So, simulan natin yung discussion doon sa kanyang kabataan. So, itong si Maria Orosa ay pinanganak noong November 29, 1893 sa bayan ng Taal. And she was the fourth of the 8 children of Simplicio Agoncillo Orosa and Juliana de Castro Ilagan. And I think this first fact about Maria Orosa, this is already very important. No, because looking at the context of Taal and of the Philippines, no, in general during this time, 1893, 3 taon na lang ay magsisimula na yung Philippine Revolution. No? So, nung panahon na ito, kilala na rin yung mga propagandista. So, ito yung kinalakihang konteksto ni Maria Orosa sa Taal. No? She was, ang kanyang konteksto nga ay yung Philippine Revolution and later on yung Philippine-American War. And I think it's also important to point out that she grew up, no, or she spent her early years in Taal, no, which is a municipality in Batangas that was able to produce several well-known personalities who fought for the freedom or the independence of the Philippines during the Spanish and American periods. No, halimbawa, ito mismong ama ni Maria Orosa, na si Simplicio Agoncillo Orosa, he was actually a steamship captain, no, who helped the Aguinaldo government, no, in transporting people and supplies throughout the archipelago. No, so ibig sabihin yung kanyang ama mismo ay involved doon sa revolusyon. And dito nga sa Taal, dito manggagaling yung ilan pang mga kilalang personalidad, no, noong Philippine Revolution tulad ni Felipe at Marcela Agoncillo, no, na kanilang kamag-anak. Dito rin manggagaling si Maria Agoncillo, no, na asawa naman ni President Emilio Aguinaldo. No, manggagaling din sa Taal si Captain Ananias Jokno, no, na nakipaglaban sa mga Espanyol sa Visayas. At dito rin manggagaling yung magkapatid na Apasible, no, na bahagi ng propaganda at ng propaganda movement at ng revolusyon. No, so ibig sabihin mula sa pagkabata, no, nitong si Maria Orosa, siya ay napapaligiran, no, sa loob at labas ng kanilang tahanan ng mga tao na lumalaban para sa Pilipinas. And I think this is a very important point. No, dahil malaki yung tsansa, no, na bata pa lang ay mulat na siya doon sa pangangailangan na ipaglaban yung bayan at magsilbi, no, sa mga kapwa niya Pilipino. So bukod doon sa detalyeng ito, no, nalaman ko rin nung sinusulat ko yung kanyang biography that eventually the family of Maria Orosa will move to Bawan, Batangas. This is approximately 25 kilometers away from Taal because of the involvement of Simplicio in the Aguinaldo government. No, kumbaga, I think na-persecute yung kanyang ama and he was imprisoned for a number of years. And after that, to avoid further conflict, no, Simplicio decided to move his family, no, to Bawan, Batangas. So bukod dito so by the way, ito pala yung picture ng kanilang ancestral house sa Bawan. No, then the previous one, this is a picture of the Taal Cathedral. So bukod dun sa kanilang ganung background, no, that their community and their very family, no, was involved in the revolution, mapapansin din natin that the Orosa family really valued education. No, yung 8 naging anak ni Simplicio at ni Juliana, lahat sila ay nakapagtapos ng kolehiyo at naging mga professional. And of course, kung tutuusin, no, malaki yung tsansa nila na makapagtapos dahil nanggagaling sila sa mayamang pamilya. Pero considering the period, no, we're talking about the early American period, no, yung 8, no, yung lahat ng mga anak ni Simplicio at Juliana ay nakapagtapos, that is still a very rare feat, kumbaga. No, hindi lahat ay nakakagawa nun kahit yung mga mayayaman. But in the case of the Orosa siblings, all of them were highly educated. And on top of that, no, pag tinignan niyo yung background o yung educational background rather ni Maria Orosa, pati na rin yung kanyang mga kapatid na si Vicente at Jose, no, hindi lang sila nag-aral sa Pilipinas. No, dahil nga matatalino itong mga magkakapatid na ito, no, naipadala sila eventually sa United States as pensionados. No, so mamaya babalikan natin yung point na yan. So eventually, Vicente and Jose, no, they studied in the US and became an engineer and a business executive. No, kung tama yung pagkakaalala ko, I think Vicente was able to study at the University of Illinois, samantalang itong si Jose ay nag-aral sa University of Washington at sa Columbia. Then eventually, similar again to Maria Orosa, both Vicente and Jose will become public servants. No, for example, itong si Vicente Orosa, he actually held cabinet level positions under the presidency of different Philippine presidents. So kung titignan natin talagang bukod sa educated sila, marami sa kanila ay nagsilbing public servants, no, among the Orosa siblings. So aside from Vicente and Jose, no, yung kapatid nilang si Sixto ay naging physician. He was a health officer and a winner of the Premio Sobel. No, their brother Nicolas was a lawyer. Then Rafael and Simplicia were educators. Then Felisa, no, similar to Maria, was a pharmacist. No, kaya kung titignan natin itong kanilang pamilya, no, talagang educated nga sila. And as the descendants, no, of the Orosas of the early American period would say, no, itong kanilang mga ninuno, they were all overachievers. No, at makikita natin ito lalong-lalo na kay Maria. No? So this picture, this shows the family. No, this was taken in the early 1930s. No, yun nga lang nung panahon na ito ay pumanaw na, no, si Ginoong Simplicio Orosa. Kaya ang nandito na lang ay yung kanilang ina, no, na si Juliana Ilagan. So punta naman tayo dun sa naging edukasyon ni Maria. So records show that after completing her high school education in Batangas, Manila was sent by the family to Manila to study pharmacy at the University of the Philippines. This was in 1915. So tapos na yung Philippine-American War, no, nagno-normalize na yung buhay sa Pilipinas. So Maria was able to go to college. Now, however, a year later, she decided to move to the United States. That was in 1916. And she applied as a government scholar under the so-called pensionado system. So kung natatandaan natin, no, pag sinabi nating pensionado system, ito ay isang government scholarship program, no, spearheaded by the colonial government in the Philippines. At ang naging layunin nito ay, una, no, ilapit yung mas maraming Pilipino sa edukasyon at kulturang Amerikano. At pangalawa, nilalayon din itong pag-aralin o yung pinakamatalinong mga Pilipino sa Estados Unidos upang pagbalik nila sa Pilipinas, sila yung magsisilbing mga leader, no, ng ating gobyerno. So, itong si Maria together with Jose and Vicente, as mentioned earlier, no, silang tatlo ay mga pensionado. No? And I think that again signifies na yung kanilang pamilya ay talagang nag-value ng education, matatalino itong mga magkakapatid na ito. So in 1916, no, Maria went to the United States to continue her studies at the University of Washington in Seattle. And by 1922, no, sa loob ng 6 na taon, nakapagtapos itong si Maria ng 3 degrees. No? So she finished 2 bachelor's degrees, particularly in pharmaceutical chemistry and food chemistry. Then later on, she also finished a master's degree in pharmacy. And she was able to do that in under 6 years. So makikita natin dito pa lang na talagang masipag, no, itong si Maria pagdating sa larangan ng pag-aaral. And I was able to find some pictures, no, from the yearbooks. no, of the University of Washington. So makikita natin dito si Maria, siya yung nasa taas. Then she was also an active member of the university's Filipino club. So batay dito sa kanilang yearbook na she served as the vice president. No, I think this was in 1920. So this is another picture, no, from the University of Washington. So kumusta naman yung naging buhay at pag-aaral ni Maria dito sa Estados Unidos? So batay sa mga naiwang records, no, ng Orosa family, in 1919, Maria was eventually joined by his younger brother Jose at the University of Washington. And despite their scholarships and allowances, no, apparently Maria had to work to earn extra money to support herself and her brother. No, dahil nga, bagamat mayaman, no, yung kanilang pamilya, syempre ibang lupain pa rin, no, itong Estados Unidos. No, iba yung standard of living, at syempre nag-aaral pa sila. At para nga masuportahan yung kanyang sarili at yung kanyang kapatid, no, lumilitaw dun sa mga sulat na naiwan ni Maria na kinailangan niya magtrabaho. No, lalong-lalo na sa panahon ng kanilang term break, no, or university break. So apparently, Maria worked as a household helper, fruit picker, and factory worker in Alaska during her university breaks. Then later on, she was also picked by the dean of the University of Washington's College of Pharmacy as a student assistant. So sa tulong nitong mga trabaho na ito, no, nagkaroon ng extra income ng itong magkapatid na Orosa dito sa Estados Unidos. So kung titignan natin, no, meron kang part-time work, no, nag-aaral ka full-time, ang hirap niyang gawin. No, lalong-lalo na sa konteksto ni Maria Orosa dahil nasa ibang lugar siya, nasa ibang bansa siya. No, yun nga lang, nakahanap pa rin ng paraan itong si Maria upang matulungan yung kanyang ina, no, dito sa Pilipinas, na during this time ay pinag-aaral pa rin yung kanyang mga nakababatang kapatid. So, batay din sa mga naiwang records at mga sulat ni Maria, no, she also made significant income from selling Philippine products such as abaka, coffee, and various clothing items that were sent to her that were sent from her mother's sari-sari store in Bawan, Batangas. No? So kung makikita natin dito na maabilidad talaga, no, itong si Maria Orosa, no, bagamat mahirap, no, yung kanyang naging buhay sa Estados Unidos, nakahanap pa rin siya ng paraan, no, para matulungan yung kanyang pamilya na naiwan dito sa Pilipinas. No, nung una, siya yung pinapadalahan ng allowance ng kanyang magulang, no, but later on, no, nung nakapag-adjust na siya dun sa buhay sa Estados Unidos, naging baliktad pa. No, siya na yung nagre-remit, no, nung kanyang kita dun sa kanyang pamilya. No? By the way, no, I forgot to mention this earlier, yung kanyang nanay, no, ay owner, no, ng isang sari-sari or sari-sari store sa Bawan, Batangas. So siya yung nag-i-import, kumbaga, no, nitong mga produkto na later on ay ibinebenta ni Maria dito sa Estados Unidos. So because of her outstanding credentials, Maria was later appointed as an assistant chemist for the government of the state of Washington in 1920. So itong particular event na ito sa kanyang buhay, she was able to write about it in a letter. No? And apparently she was very proud of this achievement, no, being appointed as an assistant chemist for the government, because during this time, no, napansin na ni Maria na meron kang discrimination pagdating sa trabaho, pagdating sa paaralan. So according to her, no, palaging inuuna, no, na i-consider syempre yung mga puti, yung mga Amerikano para sa ganitong mga uri ng trabaho. But she was very proud because she was the first choice, no, for this particular job, no? So bagamat mayroong discrimination, no, siya pa rin yung unang pinili, no, ng gobyerno para ma-occupy itong position na ito. And I guess this is again very telling. No, makikita natin na talagang matalino itong si Maria Orosa, and she had the skills, no, to become an assistant chemist. No, she even bested, no, the other white candidates. So despite the opportunities, no, that were presented to her during her time in the United States, no, buo yung desisyon nitong si Maria na bumalik sa Pilipinas. No? From the very beginning, ito naman talaga yung kanyang layunin. No? Bumalik sa Pilipinas para makapagsilbi sa mga kapwa niya Pilipino. So gagawin niya ito noong 1922. No? So she returned to the Philippines in 1922, and she initially served as a home economics teacher at the Centro Escolar de Señoritas. No? Ito yung kinikilala natin ngayon bilang Centro Escolar University. So this was in the city of Manila. Then eventually, she was tapped by the colonial government to lead various government agencies. So according to records, una siyang nagtrabaho bilang isang chemist sa Bureau of Science, and then she was later promoted as the chief of the Food Preservation and Home Economics Division of the said office. Now, eventually, she joined the Bureau of Plant Industry and headed its Plant Utilization Division. Lumilitaw din na itong by the way, this is a picture of the Bureau of Science. Lumilitaw din na itong si Maria, she was very active in the so-called Home Extension Service, na isang sangay ng gobyerno which aimed to educate women across the archipelago regarding the innovations in homemaking, childcare, and meal planning. Itong Home Extension Service, ito rin ay nagsilbing, isa rin sa mga layunin nito ay ang i-encourage yung mga kababaihan na mag-engage sa agrikultura at sa iba't ibang mga home industries para maging self-sufficient sila. So I was able to find this picture. So here makikita natin si Maria Orosa, siya yung nasa gitna. At itong mga kababaihan na nakapaligid sa kanya, ito yung kanyang mga tauhan dito sa Bureau of Plant Industry na kanyang tinrain para dito sa mga trabahong ito. So kanina binanggit natin that Maria Orosa was a food technologist. In fact, some historians, some writers would argue that she was the Philippines' first and foremost food technologist. At itong label na ito, hindi siya nakakapagtaka dahil napakarami nung kanyang naging ambag pagdating sa food preparation and preservation. So halimbawa, makikita natin na gagamitin talaga ni Maria Orosa yung kanyang talino, yung kanyang kakayanan para paunlarin yung buhay ng mga tao sa Pilipinas sa larangan ng food technology. Now, for example, one of her first innovations was a clay pot oven, which provided a more efficient way of cooking in the absence of electricity. Now, in Filipino, ito yung tinatawag nating palayok. So gumawa siya ng isang specific kind ng palayok na magagamit doon sa mga bahagi ng Pilipinas na walang kuryente. Then, it was also Maria Orosa who developed a way to properly freeze mangoes to enable its export. So for the first time, because of Maria Orosa, nagawa nating magbenta ng mangga sa ibang bansa dahil nakadevelop siya ng tamang pamamaraan kung paano siya ipipreserve. And Maria Orosa also invented the calamansi juice powder, banana ketchup, and the makapuno. So makikita natin na nandito yung kanyang interest doon sa preservation ng ating pagkain. At syempre, sa Pilipinas, napakahalaga nito dahil daw sa init, madaling napapanis yung mga pagkain. So she had to find a way to prolong the shelf life of our food. So bukod dito, she also utilized local fruits such as tamarind and santol for winemaking, and cassava and green banana for flour production. Then most probably the most famous inventions of Maria Orosa were soyalac, which was a highly nutritious infant feed made from powdered soybeans, and the so-called darak cookies, which are prepared using powdered rice bran. Ito rin yung tinatawag nilang tiki-tiki flour. So kung wala kang magagamit na harina, naghanap si Maria Orosa ng posibleng kapalit. So siya yung nag-develop ng tinatawag nating darak cookies. So according to accounts, she also developed certain methods to prolong the shelf life of popular Filipino cuisine such as adobo, dinuguan, escabeche, and kilawin. Now, in fact, according to some authors, itong si Maria Orosa daw ay, kung bibilangin, kung i-compile natin yung kanya mga methods and recipes, aabot daw ito sa halos 700. So siguro mahalagang mabalikan natin itong kanyang mga ginawa or kanyang mga naisulat dahil hindi natin alam. Baka yung mga bagay na ginagawa natin sa kusina, sa paghahanda ng pagkain, malamang ay nanggaling pala sa kanya. So you have this countless contributions to food technology made by Maria Orosa. So itong mga contribution na ito, lalo siyang titingkad pagdating natin ng 1940s. Dahil papasok yung Pilipinas or darating yung gera, yung ikalawang digmaang pangdaigdig dito sa Pilipinas. At lalong magiging useful itong mga bagay na kanyang inimbento. So her innovations in food preparation, no, and preservation saved millions of Filipinos from starvation and malnutrition. No? So of course, this is very understandable dahil nasa konteksto ka ng gera, mahirap makahanap ng pagkain. No, but because of the methods that she introduced, because of these innovations, no, mas nakahanap ng paraan yung maraming mga Pilipino kung paano papakainin yung kanilang mga pamilya. No? And aside from that, no, tulad ng binanggit ko kanina, bukod sa pagsisilbi sa bayan, bukod sa pagtulong sa mga kapwa niya Pilipino, no, itong si Maria Orosa ay isa ring war hero. No? Kaya nga, parang lahat ng aspeto ng pagiging bayani no, nagawa niya. Maria also joined the guerrilla movement and was a part of the Markings guerrilla. No, as a captain, she led the smuggling of food into Japanese-controlled concentration camps in Tarlac, Pampanga, Laguna, and at the University of Santo Tomas. No, so, bagamat napakadelikado nito, no, pinakita ni Maria yung kanyang katapangan at pinangunahan niya no, yung pagpupuslit ng pagkain dito sa mga concentration camps na ito. No, sabi nga ng ilang authors, sabi ng ilang historians, kung hindi dahil dun sa efforts ni Maria Orosa, pati na rin yung kanyang mga inventions, malamang ay mas marami pang mga Pilipino at mga Amerikanong sundalo yung mamamatay. No, dahil dun sa kalunos-lunos na kondisyon sa loob ng mga concentration camps. So, batay sa mga accounts dun sa mga kamag-anak ni Maria, during the war, no, she chose to stay in Manila. No, paulit-ulit siyang pinakiusapan ng kanyang mga kamag-anak na pumunta na lang sa Batangas no, to seek refuge. At kung tutuusin, no, she could have led a luxurious life dahil nga mayaman yung kanilang pamilya, may kaya sila. And by this time, halos lahat ng kanyang mga kapatid ay nagtatrabaho na or tapos na sa pag-aaral. So wala nang kailangan isipin si Maria Orosa sa panahon na ito. No? Yun nga, no, she chose to stay in Manila. No, batay sa isang account, no, sinabi niya sa isang kamag-anak na bilang isang sundalo, trabaho niya na manatili kasama yung mga kapwa niya sundalo no, o yung mga kapwa niya guerrilla na lumalaban sa mga Hapon. No, yun nga lang, by 1945, during the Battle of Manila, no, on February 30, 1945 to be exact, Maria was hit by a shrapnel which punctured her heart and she died in line of duty. No? So ito yung dahilan kung bakit kinoconsider talaga natin siya na isang bayani. No? Dahil dun sa kanyang active participation in the guerrilla movement. So, dahil dito sa mga kontribusyon niya sa Pilipinas, no, sa panahon ng gera at ng kapayapaan, Maria received several awards and recognitions. Now, for example, right after the Second World War, no, she was given a service award no, by the American National Red Cross. No, by the way, itong picture na nasa likod, ito ay statue ni Maria Orosa na makikita nyo sa complex no, ng Batangas Capitol. Then eventually, I think this was in the 1960s, a street in Manila, Malate, Manila was also named after her. No, yung tinatawag nating Maria Y. Orosa Street. So dito sa picture na to, makikita nyo yung kanyang mga kamag-anak no, during the inauguration. Then in 1993, to celebrate her 100 her centennial, no, yung kanya 100 birthday, the Philippine Postal Corporation issued commemorative stamps bearing her portrait. So that's Maria Orosa. Then in 1983, on the other hand, a historical marker was installed by the NHI, the National Historical Institute, at the building of the Bureau of Plant Industry in Manila. Then you also have a pavilion at the Balara Filters Park in Quezon City that was named after her. It's called the Maria Orosa Hall. And then more recently in 2019, no, to celebrate yung kanyang 126th birthday, no, Google Doodle no, featured a portrait of Maria Orosa. No? At kung tutuusin, deserve naman itong si Maria Orosa lahat ng awards at recognitions na ito dahil nga doon sa napakarami niyang kontribusyon para sa Pilipinas. No? And again, meron tayong recent development tungkol sa kanya. In February 2020, no, before the pandemic, no, a team of archaeologists from the University of the Philippines accidentally discovered a tombstone bearing the name of Maria in a mass grave within Malate Catholic School, which was the previous location of Remedios Hospital. So after matamaan ng shrapnel nitong si Maria Orosa, dito siya dinala sa Remedios Hospital at dito na rin siya binawian ng buhay. No? So it was it was an interesting discovery, no, and it really ignited the curiosity and interest of many Filipinos regarding this war hero. No, yun nga lang mahalagang linawin that further examinations are still needed to confirm whether the remains of Maria are in this site. No, dahil mahirap na siyang i-confirm sa ngayon. So kailangan pa siyang pag-aralan ng mga dalubhasa. No, pero yun nga, mahalagang banggitin itong development na ito dahil talagang binuhay niya, no, yung curiosity at yung interest ng mga Pilipino patungkol dito, no, kay Maria Orosa. At syempre umaasa tayo na magpapatuloy itong interest na ito dahil talagang maituturing natin na isang bayani, no, si Maria Orosa, no, sa panahon ng digmaan at sa panahon ng kapayapaan. No, talagang napakarami ng kanyang naging ambag para sa ikauunlad ng Pilipinas. No, so yun lamang po at maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Francis Justine M. Malban.
And for our final research speaker, may we have Assistant Professor Francisco Jayme Paolo A. Guiang. Francisco Jayme Paolo A. Guiang is an assistant professor at the UP Department of History. He obtained his BA History degree and MA History degree from UP Diliman. Currently taking his PhD in history in the same university, his research interests focus on Marxism and historical scholarship, the history of activist and student movements in the Philippines, and nationalism in the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Francisco Jayme Paolo A. Guiang.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar for this day. I'm here with my colleagues to discuss several of our selected women heroes in our project for PVAO. And this is one of the women heroes that I've selected for this afternoon's lecture. Her name is Bay Hadja Fatima Matabay Plang from North Cotabato today. So let's begin with the context of the period. During the Filipino-American War, American forces struggled to occupy Mindanao and Sulu to force the Filipino Muslims to acknowledge American sovereignty. Likewise, the new colonizers asserted to maintain neutrality among several communities of Filipino Muslims so as not to stretch their military forces designated in various battles in Luzon. The actualization of these efforts was the signing of the Bates Treaty, or the Kiram-Bates Treaty in August 1899 between the Sultanate of Sulu and the American colonizers. There were also similar agreements made between Filipino Muslim chiefs of Mindanao and Basilan and the Americans, which seemingly invoked diplomacy. Eventually, American colonial motives became obvious, and the Filipino Muslims began to reject the foreigners through a series of Moro rebellions. The military conflict between the Filipino Muslims and the Americans transpired as early as 1899 and lasted up to 1913. Battles became brutal and relentless. Some even resulted in the massacre of many Muslim Filipinos, particularly the battles of Bujdaho in 1906 and Bagsak in 1913. Nevertheless, the decision of the Americans to directly control Muslim affairs in Mindanao and Sulu was made possible through the creation of the Moro Province, which governed the area from 1903 to 1913. This was succeeded by the Department of Mindanao and Sulu, formed in 1914 and lasted up to 1920. Since the American mandate was enforced, colonial supervision over political and economic affairs was set in place. Additionally, a program of public works was implemented by expanding hospitals and schools. These measures were met with uneasiness as customary and traditional Muslim practices were threatened, most particularly concerning the exercise of political and judicial power. So let's proceed to the main topic of our lecture. This was the socio-political context when Bay Haja Fatima Matabay Plang was born on January 21, 1912 in Tikit, Cotabato, presently North Cotabato. Bay Matabay was a Muslim princess and the daughter of Datu Plang and Bay Namli Plang. During her formative years, the region's American governor, Frank Carpenter, implemented a policy that required all firstborn children of ruling datus of Mindanao and Sulu to be sent to American schools for instruction. As a government pensionado, Bay Matabay was sent to Holo Girls Boarding School where she finished primary education. Then she matriculated at Cotabato Elementary School, Cotabato High School, and Zamboanga Normal School where she completed her elementary and secondary education. Before pursuing the tertiary level, she managed to teach for 2 years. In 1931, Bay Matabay attended the Philippine Normal School, which is presently the Philippine Normal University, where she studied library science and home economics. Cotabato was close to her heart, so she decided to go back home, and resume her teaching career. In 1948, she was fortunately accepted as a Fulbright scholar and enrolled at the University of Chicago for a social welfare degree. The year spent abroad was well spent because it allowed her to visit various higher educational institutions in the US, Canada, and Mexico. All of these were made possible through financial grants that furthered her expertise in the field of social work. By this time, Bay Matabay had enough knowledge and determination to apply what she had learned to help the communities in Mindanao. It was in the most crucial times that Bay Matabay exhibited her heroism. During the Japanese occupation, she joined the efforts to strengthen the guerrilla warfare against the invaders. From 1941 to 1944, she organized the Moro Bolo Battalion together with her uncle Dato Udtong Matalam. With the women of Mlang Cotabato, she also established the guerrilla auxiliary service that took charge of uplifting the morale of guerrilla fighters, comforting the widows, and feeding the orphaned children. The Japanese eventually bombed Mlang Cotabato in 1943 after gaining knowledge of guerrilla activities in the area. Nonetheless, Bay Matabay did not think twice about offering her services to the resistance amidst imminent danger. Even after the post-war years, her contributions to nation building did not stop. After the Second World War, she resumed her passion for teaching. Because of her privileged background, Bay Matabay donated 2 hectares of land in the barrio of Balongis in Pikit, Cotabato to establish what would become the Balongis Elementary School. What was impressive was that she taught in the same school and even handled 4 grade levels at the same time. Thereafter, she and Esperanza Sabulao of Kidapawan, Cotabato founded the Central Mindanao College in 1947. Bay Matabay also lobbied in Congress to obtain government support, which led to the foundation of an advanced educational institutions for Muslims in Mindanao. She became successful in 1952 when Republic Act No. 763 was signed into law, thereby creating the Mindanao Institute of Technology, or MIT. In 1954, Republic Act No. 998 made the institute operational by appropriating the amount of 200,000 pesos for the said school. She became the institution's overseer and then served as college and board secretary and then liaison officer until 1968. Today, MIT operates under a new institutional name. It's called today the University of Southern Mindanao, which boasts to be, quote, the premier land-grant university in the Southern Philippines, unquote. The success of MIT's establishment did not stop her to continue lobbying in Congress for government support. In 1963, Bay Matabay successfully pushed for the passage of Republic Act No. 3801, which allotted 1,000 hectares of land in Arakan, Cotabato, reserved for the establishment of the Children's Education Foundation Village. This institution became the home to over 840 orphans composed of Muslims, Christians, Manobos, and others. Today, it operates as the Cotabato Foundation College of Science and Technology. Even after she retired from public service in 1977, education for the youth remained her vocation. This was exemplified when she founded the Mindanao Islamic Foundation Polytechnic Institute in Pikit, Cotabato, her home province. Indeed, Bay Matabay's lifelong work has been dedicated to uplift the rural poor in Mindanao, mostly in Cotabato through education. Though she passed away on April 13, 1984, her immense contribution to literacy is remembered through the educational institutions she helped establish. More so, her efforts did not go unnoticed by the public. The numerous awards and distinctions she received was a testament to her exemplary career in the field of education. For example, President Carlos V. Garcia conferred Bay Matabay the Presidential Award on July 3, 1961 for her work on education and social work. Other recognitions include the Award of Appreciation for Services Rendered to Uplift the Children and Youth of Mindanao, given by the Department of Social Welfare in 1975. She was also appointed to be a member of the National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women in 1975. She was also conferred the Golden Medallion Award given by the Visayas in Mindanao Kiwanis Club in 1976, as well as the Tandang Sora Award in 1977. Here are some of the photos of Bay Haja Fatima Matabay Plang in the website of the University of Southern Mindanao. And this was a dedicated poster, I think, published by Rappler for Bay Matabay Plang. And she is regarded as one of the most outstanding Muslim women who fought for education for Mindanaoans and founded the Mindanao Institute of Technology, or MIT. That would be it for my lecture, and I will be entertaining questions in the Q&A portion shortly after the last lecture. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sir Guiang.
Now, before we proceed to the next part of our program, let us have a wellness break with an intermission number from Mr. Jason Kahurao of the Veterans Records Management Division of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office. Once again, Mr. Jason Kahurao.
Kababaihan, ngunit kung tayo'y saktan parang walang hanggan. Bakit nga ba? Nakaguhit sa ating mukha na tayong lahat ay biktima. Nagalupitan, karahasan, pilit tayong dinadapa. Ang bilyong babae ang babangon. Ito na ang ating panahon. Bangon, babae, bangon. Ito na ang ating panahon. Itaas ang kamay. At tayo'y lalaban ng sabay-sabay. Bawat Tigahasa, huwag matakot at lumaban na tama na ang pang-aabuso. Tumayo tayo, kaya natin ito. Bilyong babae ang babangon. Tayo ang Gabriela ng ating panahon. Bangon, babae, bangon. Ito na ang ating panahon. Itaas ang kamay, itaas ang kamay. At tayo'y lalaban ng sabay-sabay. Bawat tindak, bawat galaw, buong kataway sumisigaw. Bangon, babae, bangon. Ito na ang ating panahon.
Wow, thank you very much, Mr. Jason, for that wonderful and groovy performance. Moving on, we are now giving the floor to Mr. Patrick James P. Serra, our Q&A moderator for today's episode. Sir?
Okay. Thank you very much, Nico and Maggie. So we now open the floor for the questions from the audience and the public. For our FB viewers, please place your questions on the comment section. And for our Zoom participants, please place your questions on our chat box. So before you send your questions, kindly indicate as well as to whom you will be addressing your question. So we have one here from our Zoom chat box. So this was sent by Mr. Ryan Villegas. So this is addressed to Professor Ramos. So to read, is Mrs. Dairit Panlilio's husband related to former Pampanga Governor Among Ed Panlilio? Professor Ramos?
Hello, magandang hapon. Naririnig na ba ako, PJ?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Hello, magandang hapon. Maraming salamat po sa tanong, Mr. Ryan Villegas. However, unfortunately, mukhang hindi ko masasagot yung tanong dahil hindi rin po ako sigurado. Actually, no, sinusulat ko itong paper, nawala sa isip ko si Among Ed Panlilio. So hindi ko na-research kung magkamag-anak ba sila. Pero for background, si Among Ed kasi ay nanggaling sa Mayminalin, Pampanga. As opposed, halimbawa doon kay Vicente Panlilio. Pero tingin ko kailangan ko pang tignan ng masinsinan yan, no? Kung ano yung connection or kung magkamag-anak ba si Among Ed at saka yung asawa ni Nicolasa. So ayun, maraming salamat.
Okay. Sige, thank you Professor Ramos. Sige, while we are waiting for other questions, I have one prepared for our three speakers. So ano naman, very general. Yung question is, paano pa higit na mapapalitaw ang mga kababaihan sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas? So pwede pong sumagot perhaps he's Professor Malban.
Alright. Salamat din sa tanong, PJ, no. Siguro dahil nga I think ang masasabi ko doon, no, ang pinaka immediate off the top of my head would be really to for us, no, to study more about them, no, kung paano sila papalitawin kasi pag pinag-uusapan yung kasaysayan, yung history, syempre nakabatay ito sa kung ano yung pinag-aaralan or sinusulat natin. And I think that's the first step, no. We need more people to engage in women's history. No, kaya nga kami nila Dondy, nila Gio, no, we're really grateful for this project. No, kasi hindi naman kami talaga nagsusulat, no, patungkol sa mga kababaihan, but with the guidance of PVAO, of Dr. Neil Marshall Santillan and Dr. Maria Bernadette Labrera, no, talaga naging fruitful itong aming proyekto, no, and we're hoping na ma-publish na ito sa mga susunod na panahon. No, pero yun nga, to answer again that question, no, we need more people na really to engage in women's history. Kasi kung walang magsusulat, talagang kung walang interesado or walang magsusulat, talagang mahirap siyang gawin. And of course, siguro mahalaga rin na bukod sa bukod sa ganung perspective, no, dapat balikan din natin kung ano na yung mga naisulat na. No, kasi definitely hindi naman ito bago, no, yung field ng women's history in the Philippines. Halimbawa, no, mula sa Departamento ng Kasaysayan, nandyan yung isa dun sa mga talagang trailblazers natin sa Philippine history. And I think kasama natin siya ngayong hapon. No, nandirito si Dr. Maria Luisa T. Camagay, no, Professor Emeritus sa Departamento ng Kasaysayan.
Ayan, maraming salamat po, Professor Malban. Baka po may gustong idagdag sina Professor Guiang and Professor Ramos.
Hello, PJ, naririnig ba ako?
Ayan, sir, apo. Go,
Okay,
Sir
medyo
Gio.
mabagal yung internet ko. Sorry, baka makat ako anytime. Sususugan ko lang yung sinabi ni Francis na mahalaga talagang balikan yung mga naisulat na tungkol sa yung role ng kababaihan sa kasaysayan at i-expand pa ito. Ang isa ding mahalaga dito, I think ito na nga sinisimulan na ng PVAO, for example, isang example ng PVAO. Hindi ko naman sinasabi na PVAO yung nauna, pero marami pa siguro mga examples. Yung institutional support sa mga naratibo ng kabayanihan, ng mga kababaihan, at generally yung role ng kababaihan sa kasaysayan, no? Kasi pag nandyan yung institutional support, for sure maraming mag-i-engage sa research sa women's history. Meron na tayong mga experts on women's history. Nabanggit ni Francis, si Dr. Camagay, kasama natin ngayon. Mas maganda sana kung mas madami pa mga susunod sa yapak ng mga women's historians, no? Dito talaga mapapalitaw yung boses ng kababaihan through the sources. Kailangan ng institutional support yan kung hahanapin mo yung mga sources, kukondak ka ng research. Kung makikita natin, marami sa mga diniscuss ngayong hapon na ito ay mga, for example, mga pensionado. For sure, may sources yan sa archive sa United States. At para ma-dig up mo yan, kailangan mo pumunta sa United States para halukayin yung archives doon. Hindi ba kung ano activities nila doon? For example, yung kanilang education, no? So mahalaga yung institutional support din talaga. Yun yung gusto kong i-highlight. At maganda tong initiative ng PVAO na sinimulan nila yung paglitaw ng mga Ito nga, may project nga 'di ba? Hindi lang naman itong tatlong na i-highlight ngayong hapon yung women heroes. Marami yan doon sa project. So maganda itong initiative na ganito, simulain.
Okay. Nais ko lang din idagdag, no. Sana ma-encourage din natin yung ating mga kabataan na kababaihan na magsulat ng kasaysayan ng mga kababaihan. Sa halimbawa, napansin ko ngayon dito sa forum, kami tatlong speakers ay mga lalaki. So sana magkaroon din na mas marami na babae nagsusulat ng kasaysayan ng kababaihan. Pangalawa is yung pag-engage natin sa public gamit yung iba't ibang mga platforms at public history events siguro tungkol sa kababaihan. Halimbawa, more documentaries on women's history, film on women's history, at halimbawa, nagkaroon din yung Department of History noong nakaraang taon ng Public History Conference, at ang keynote nga natin ay si Dr. Camagay, kung saan ang naging paksa natin ay yung pampublikong kasaysayan at yung pag-aaral ng kasaysayan ng kababaihan. So I guess kailangan ng mas marami pang mga events katulad noon na ini-engage natin din yung public. Ayun, maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat po. Siguro siya, low-key invite sa pag-apply sa history program ng involvement of mga kababaihan. So for our next question, ito ay galing from Ma'am Mary Angeline. So to any of the speakers, may kapansin-pansing disparity po ba sa paghirang or pag-recognize or pagtrato ng mga bayaning babae kumpara sa mga bayaning lalaki dito sa bansa? So kung sino na lang po sigurong mauna.
Well, narinig ba ako, PJ?
Sige. I'll go ahead, sir. Apa.
Well, ako I think so. No, na at hindi ito unique syempre sa Pilipinas, no, kahit sa ibang bansa naman o sa ibang societies, meron talaga hindi talaga siya pantay. No, so syempre maraming factors kung bakit nagaganoon. Pero halimbawa, no, sa field na lang ng kasaysayan na for a very long time, no, before the 20th century, talaga ang tuon ng pagsusulat ay sa kalalakihan. Kaya nga magkakaroon ng field na women's history. Kasi magsisimula nang i-recognize ng mga scholars na merong shortcoming yung disiplina na kinakailangan ay palitawin din natin yung mga kababaihan dahil definitely nandun sila sa mga historical events. No, hindi lang sila nasa periphery at tulad ng napapatunayan natin dito sa ating project, dito sa lecture series, ay aktibong bahagi sila ng maraming historical events. No, pero yeah, to answer that question, meron talaga, no, nag-exist talaga siya because of many factors.
PJ.
Go, sige sir, go ahead
Gusto
po.
ko lang ding idagdag, no, tulad nung sinabi ni Professor Malban. So, kasi karamihan din ng mga naunang sources ay mas focus sa mga kalalakihan, alam naman natin yon, mga elite. Maliban pa doon, no, meron talagang disparity. Halimbawa ngayon may proyekto kami na ginagawa, na nagre-review kami ng mga textbooks ng grade 5 and grade 6 at makikita mo doon na halos yung ibang textbooks ay walang nilalaan na pahina or na naratibo tungkol sa mga kababaihan sa kasaysayan. No, kung meron man may mababanggit na mangilan-ngilan pero wala din talaga, hindi pantay yung pagtalakay sa mga kababaihan doon sa mga nababanggit na kalalakihan sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas halimbawa. So I think kailangan ding strengthen yung part na yon. So yun lamang po.
Hello PJ.
Sige sir, go ahead po.
Nag-agree ako kay Dondy at Francis. Parang nasabi din nila lahat ng maisip kong sasabihin. And gusto ko lang din i-underscore yung sinabi din ni Francis na hindi siya unique sa Pilipinas. Tama yan. In fact, kung aaralin mo yung, for example, sa ibang bahagi ng mundo, ibang civilizations, for example, there are sources that would tell you na may mga women leaders, for example, in Egypt, may mga pharaoh na naging babae, pero sa documents, gusto nilang lalaki ang appearance nila because of their culture. So may kanya-kanyang konteksto na pinanggagalingan yung bawat lugar at area. Kung dito sa Pilipinas yan, unfortunately din, makikita mo na halos lahat ng sources, gaya ng sinabi ni Dondy, tinatampok niya yung activities ng mga kalalakihan. And hindi lang din, for example, marami dyan mga elite. Di ba? Mga prinsipalya, for example, mga ganito kaya meron kang mga emergent fields katulad ng women's history, social history, na pinapalitaw niya yung mga hindi na-emphasize before sa mga naratibo. At babalik tayo muli, paano ba natin ito ma-underscore sa ano natin ngayon, sa pag-aaral natin moving forward. Kailangan natin ng mas marami pang researchers dito sa field na ito. Tamang-tama yung sinabi ni Dondy kanina na sana din maitampok yung mga women historians, mga kababaihan na nagre-research tungkol sa kasaysayan ng kababaihan din. Marami yan marami, no? Kasi kami mga lalaki kami, di ba? So women historians talaga. And then, babalik din ako doon sa fact na yung institutional support din, again, babalik ka doon sa fact na institutional support. Kung wala kang support, ano yung funding, hindi ba? Diyan yun minsan makikita mo sa funding na ano ba yung area na pinaprioritize ng research ngayon sa field ng social sciences or sa history, for example, hindi ba? Kailangan mo ng mas maraming attention tungkol dito, no? At magandang nabibigyan ng highlight ito sa mga ganitong forum na sana tuloy-tuloy pa, hindi ba? At hindi lang yung usapin mismo ng for example, women's history, dagdag na din dyan yung women's struggle. Yun yung mahalaga doon, hindi ba? Ano yung naging struggle ng
Naghang po yata si Professor Guiang.
Ayan, naglag na ako. Di ba yan yung sinasabi ko?
Ayan,
unstable internet connection. Yun nga, yung struggle, mahalaga din yung struggle i-underscore. Hindi lang yung naratibo nila, kundi yung struggle nila sa kasaysayan. Para maintindihan mo kung bakit importante na mapalitaw yung boses ng kababaihan. Di ba? So mahalaga din yun. No? Activity nila and heroism, okay yun. Pati yung struggle, mahalaga.
Okay. Po, maraming salamat po. Itong tanong, susunod na tanong ay galing sa ating Facebook viewer. So si Jomel Taktakin. So I'll read na lang. Magandang hapon po. Itanong ko lang po kung may plano o programa ang UP upang ipanukala ang alternatibong syllabus para talakayin or pag-aralan ang mga kwento ng bayaning babae sa loob ng klase.
Hello, magandang hapon po, Sir Jomel Taktakin. Si Sir ay galing sa PVAO. Siya yung kasama natin na nag-i-edit dun sa ating textbook, dun sa ating libro na proyekto na ginagawa. So actually, simula pa yata noong 2010 ay yung Department of History ay mayroon ng dinevelop na syllabus sa pangunguna ni Professor Camagay na Women's History. Ito yung CAS 118. Tama ba? So halos lahat kami, ako naging kaklase ko si Francis doon sa klase na yon ni Professor Camagay. At maliban pa doon, meron ding iba't ibang mga aktibidad yung Department of History tulad nga ng Public History Symposium na nakaraan at itong Bayanihan para itampok yung kwento ng mga kababaihan at yung gender studies din. So ayun, baka may gusto pang idagdag yung mga kasama.
Ayan. Actually, sir, may follow-up po from Ma'am Marie Angeline Polvito. So, she's asking po kung ano yung pamagat ng librong nababanggit or hindi pa ba pwedeng sabihin? Ano muna? At kailan po kaya ito daw maipapalabas sa publiko?
Huli malapit na, no? Ito ay actually na-delay nga ito dahil sa pandemya. Pero natapos na namin yung manuscript at ngayon ay nagkakaroon na lang ng final editing bago ito mai-publish nung PVAO. At yung working title niya, Identity and Independence, Filipino Women in Times of War and Peace. So ayun, sana po ay matapos na, malapit na. So ayun.
Okay. Sige po. Sige po. For our next question, so ito po ay galing from Mr. EJ Bolata from UP Department of History. So sabi niya, to our speakers, ano po yung mga hamon pagdating sa pananaliksik at pagsusulat ng kasaysayan ng kababaihan sa Pilipinas? So halimbawa sa usapin ng sources at interpretation and sa inyo na rin karanasan ng pag-research at pagsusulat. Sige sir. Sir Francis, go ahead po.
I think yung tanong ni Professor Balata medyo mahirap siyang sagutin. No, kasi alam ko na yung mga involved dun sa project, halimbawa kami ni Dondy NGO, hindi naman talaga kami lubog sa women's history kung tutuusin. No, it's a new opportunity for us, no, and we're still starting. No, pero halimbawa sa kaso ko, wala naman ako naging problema pagdating sa sources. No, kasi yung topic or yung topic ko nga ay si Maria Orosa, and I'm really fortunate that many of the accounts no pertinent to her were actually preserved by the family, no, and in fact available nga yung ilang letters niya online. Ako ang mas naging issue ko, no, at alam to ng mga kasama natin dun sa project, puro lalaki nga tayo halos, no, na nagsusulat, no, and I'm not sure kung ganito rin yung kaso sa ibang departments of history, pero sa totoo lang, no, alam ito ng ating chair, no, ni Sir Neil, na yung mga applicants natin ay puro kalalakihan, kaya wala rin tayong choice dahil tayo lang din talaga yung magsusulat, at least in our department. Siguro ako mas yun yung problema when it comes to interpretation dahil puro lalaki kaming nagsusulat as of now. No, siguro tama yung sinabi ni PJ kanina na low-key ay nag-iimbita tayo, no, ng mas maraming mga babae na not only to engage, no, in historical scholarship but also to apply, no, at the UP Department of History dahil kailangan po talaga siya.
Sige, go ahead Sir Dondy.
Ay, go Don.
Si Dondy
Sige,
po and
salamat.
then si Professor Gio.
Sige, salamat Gio.
Okay lang.
Ako same din, no, para dito sa particular kay Nicolas sa Direct Panlilio. Ito naman low-key invitation na pumunta doon sa Pampanga kasi preserve din yung mga gamit niya, yung ilan sa mga sources doon sa heritage house niya at hindi pa siya converted as museum pero pwedeng pumunta yung mga turista doon sa malapit sa may heritage area sa San Fernando at meron din siyang monument doon. Hindi ko lang alam ngayon dahil nga may ECQ yung NCR Plus, no? Pero maliban doon, yung sinasabi ni Professor Malban ay yun din yung naging challenge para sa akin doon sa part ng interpretation kasi lalaki kami, so medyo doon ako nagkaroon ng challenge, no? At tulad din ng sinabi ni Prof Malban, sana magkaroon pa tayo ng maraming colleagues na bata na mag-apply sa Department Kababaihan. So yon, maraming salamat.
Go ahead, sir, Professor Gio.
Hello? Okay.
Ay, naghang ulit po yata. Tingin po natin siya. Ayan, sir. Naghang po kayo,
no?
sir. Opo.
Okay, sige.
Sige, sir.
Bibilisan ko lang yung sagot ko, no? Basically, sinabi na ni Francis at ni Dondy yung punto ng perspective. Hindi ba? Pero case-to-case basis din, for example, sa mga women heroes na ni-research namin, for example, yung isa sa mga ni-research ko, Gabriela Silang, ang dami ding nasulat tungkol sa kanya, which made the research much more easier. For example, kay Bay Matabay Plang, halos lahat ng sources na kinonsult ko are compilations of women heroes na na-publish na before, which is relatively ang hirap. And then yun yung basis mo for corroboration. For example, sources in the internet. Maswerte na lang tayo na University of Southern Mindanao may extensive source about the life of Bay Matabang. And then you can corroborate. Ang maganda sana tingnan dito primary source. Hindi ba? Based doon sa narrative ni Bay Matabay, ang dami niyang pinuntahan, for example, sa US ng mga University of Chicago. Meron pa siya sa Cherokee Indian Reservation School sa North Carolina. And then nag-ano pa siya, University of Hawaii East West Center. Kung pupuntahan mo yung mga ano na yon, yung mga schools na yun, at titingnan mo yung kanilang records, then probably you can get more information about, for example, in my example, kay Bay Matabay lang, no? But we have that opportunity, of course, hindi ba? And then for example, nagka-pandemic pa, hindi ba? So that was a challenge. That's a challenge in terms of research generally in this context, no? So yun yung mga challenges, no? Depende din sa woman hero. Depende kung gaano ka-extensive na yung nasulat tungkol sa kanya na pwede mong tuntungan for further research. Pero kung hindi pa, you really have to dig in through the sources. Maybe you have to conduct fieldwork pa nga, pupunta ka doon sa area mismo. Eh, hindi naman ako nagkaroon ng opportunity na pumunta sa North Cotabato, hindi ba? To do research in the University of Southern Mindanao. So sana merong magtuloy, hindi ba? Dito sa project na ito. So yun.
Tama nga po. Sige po, ito po ay ang ating last question from Gabriel Joseph Barroso. So sabi niya, to any of the speakers then, ano po yung pinakamalaking salik kung bakit madalas pong naisasantabi yung pagtuturo ng iba't ibang naratibo ng kababaihang bayani sa atin? So lalo na po sa ating basic education. Po. Ayan, sige sir. Go Professor Malban.
PJ, tama ba yung rinig, yung understanding? Ang tanong ay, pakiulit. Sorry, medyo
sige,
choppy.
Sir. Chop. Ako na po pa. Sige, wait lang po. Apo. So sabi niya po, ano yung pinakamalaking salik or factor kung bakit madalas pong naisasantabi yung pagtuturo ng iba't ibang naratibo ng kababaihang bayani sa atin. So sa basic education, yung pinapatungkulan niya.
Well, ako kasi in our case, kasi halimbawa tayo, ang hirap sagutin kasi basic education, no? Hindi naman tayo talaga galing doon, no? Pero in our department, no, halimbawa para sa akin, sa atin, no, in our department specifically, mukhang nabibigyan siya ng tuon eh. No? Kasi marami tayong mga activities katulad nito na ang layunin talaga ay mas gawin pang popular o mas ipahayag pa no, sa mas maraming tao yung women's history. No, but I think meron tayong mga colleagues sa department na nag research no patungkol sa history textbook sa grade school. No, I think mas kaya nilang sagutin ito, Gio or Dondy.
Yung sa ano, yun, nabanggit na ni Don dito kanina eh, no? Pag titingnan mo yung textbooks talaga, puro lalaki yung lumilitaw na narrative sa history. Mas lalo, for example, yung mga revolts, for example. Andun si Gabriela Silang okay, pero majority mga lalaki. Siguro ang isang mahalagang salik dito is papaano sinusulat yung textbook, ano yung sources na kinoconsult nila, hindi ba? Ano pa ba? So basically, yun yung naiisip ko eh. Ano yung mga sources na pinanggagalingan ng textbook, sino yung nagsusulat ng mga textbooks, hindi ba? So dito ngayon dilitaw na parang kailangan magkaroon ng trickle down, mag-trickle down yung hindi man movement, pero yung initiative na i-highlight yung, let's say, women's history down to the basic education level. Hindi ba? I mean, napapatampok na natin siya sa tertiary education. At least in the Department of History, we can say that, hindi ba? At yung efforts ng Department of History, kasi doon kami nanggagaling eh. Nakikita namin yung pag-highlight talaga sa women's history, social history, for example, etc. Ibang usapin yung sa ginagawang curriculum ng DepEd, hindi ba? Kailangan mo ilaban yan eh, na kailangan may ganitong portions ng kasaysayan sa mga textbooks, for example, kasi DepEd yung nagtatakda niyan. So maganda sanang ma-propose at maisama doon sa, hindi lang doon sa pedagogical aspect, kundi pati doon sa content creation na basis ng textbook, kasi DepEd yung naggagawa ng general syllabus na basis ng textbook writers for their research and writing. So magandang doon magsimula, hindi ba? Para mabago yung general narrative sa textbooks at mapatampok talaga itong ganitong topic, women's history. And again, yun nga, sources. Challenge din yan sa source eh. Kung wala namang source yung textbook writers na available to them, ano yung isusulat niya? Ganun pa rin, hindi ba? So, kailangan, you have to make the sources available to educators, not only in the tertiary level na gumagawa din ng research, but also in the basic education level, basic secondary and primary school teachers na nagsusulat ng textbooks. No? So yun yung yun yung isang nakikita kong sali.
Professor Ramos?
Wala na akong idadagdag doon sa mga sinabi nila. Nag-agree ako sa sinasabi nila. Gusto ko na lang sigurong i-highlight na pwede tayong kumuha ng good practice, halimbawa sa LGU nung San Fernando City sa Pampanga. Tulad nung nabanggit ko kanina sa presentation ko, nung 2012 kasi nagkaroon ng parang competition tungkol sa paggawa ng isang children's book tungkol kay Nicolasa Dairit Pandilio. And then yung nanalo na children's book, 12-page siya na children's book, ito ay nirequire nila na gawing readings para sa mga elementary students doon sa nasasakupan ng LGU ng San Fernando. Siguro pwedeng simulan din natin sa ganon para maitampok natin yung mga women heroes natin sa basic education. So ayun lamang. Salamat.
Ayan. So maraming salamat po to our speakers and for those who asked the questions. So at this juncture po, I will be closing or ending our open forum and then giving back to the floor to our MCs. Thank you very much. Thank you po.
All right, so thank you very much, Mr. Patrick James Bisera, and of course to all our participants here on Zoom and on Facebook Live. Thank you very much as well to all our recent speakers for responding to all of our viewers' questions. As we now near the end of the program, let us have one of the country's foremost scholar in the Philippine women's history, Professor Professor Emeritus Maria Luisa T. Camagay of the UP Department of History.
Binabati ko ang Veterans Affairs Office sa webinar na ito. Para sa Departamento ng Kasaysayan, ang webinar na ito ay pagpapatuloy ng seryeng Bayani'Han na ibig itanghal ang iba't ibang anyo ng kabayanihan na inilunsad noong 2019. Hindi na idaos ang serye noong 2020 dahil sa pandemya ng COVID. Mapalad tayo ngayon hapon na tuloy ang nabanggit na serye. Aktibong kalahok sa seryeng ito ang Philippine Veterans Affairs Office na may layunin itanghal ang kabayanihan ng kababaihan sa pamamagitan ng isang pananaliksik na pinamagatan Identity and Independence, Filipino Women in Times of War and Peace sa pamumuno ng dekano ng Kolehiyo ng Agham, Panlipunan at Filosofiya na si Profesor Maria Bernadette Abrera. Inaasahan na ang nasabing pananaliksik ay magbubunga ng isang aklat. Magandang tanungin kung ang kabayanihan ba ay may gender dimension. Iba ba ang ipinamamalas na kabayanihan ng babae sa lalaki? Sa aking pananaw, kapwa babae at lalaki ay maaaring maging bayani, ngunit sa ibang anyo at paraan nila ito ipinakikita. Linikha ang lalaki na ipakita ang kanyang kabayanihan o katapangan gamit ang kanilang lakas pisikal, madalas sa pampublikang larangan tulad ng gera. Samantalang, ang babae ay ginagamit ang kanyang mapagkalingang katangian or nurturing quality at empatiya or empathy para sa kanyang kapwa. Hindi ko sinasabi na walang nurturing quality at empathy ang mga lalaki, ngunit higit na malakas ito sa mga babae dahil sa kanyang reproductive role. Kapansin-pansin rin sa babae na ituring ang anumang gawa niya ay hindi kabayanihan dahil sa socialization na nararanasan niya. Ipinalaki ang babae sa paniniwala na mas importante ang gawa ng lalaki kaysa sa babae. Madalas makita sa babae ang tendensiyang i-undervalue o hindi pahalagaan ang kanyang gawa. Tignan na lang natin ang papel ng tatlong babaeng tinalakay ngayon hapon. Ang paglahok ni Nicolasa Dairi Panghilio sa digmaang Pilipino-Amerikano, sa Huntang Patriotika sa Pampanga, at partikular sa paggawa niya ng watawat ng mga revolusyonaryong Kapampangan ay marahil natural lamang para sa kanya. Gayon din ang paggamit ni Maria Orosa ng kaalaman niya sa chemistry at food technology para tugunan ang problema ng pagkain at maibsan ang gutom ng panahon ng Hapon. Masasabi rin ito sa kaso ni Bai Hadja Fatima Matabay Plang. Bahagi ng pagpapakita niya ng kalinga ang donasyon niya ng 2 ektaryang lupa na tinayuan ng Basungis Elementary School, ang pagtatatag niya ng Central Mindanao University at Mindanao Institute of Technology. Hindi itinuturing ng mga babae ito na kabayanihan ang kanilang ginawa. Sa kontekstong ito, kung gayon, tungkulin natin itanghal na ang kanilang ginawa ay kabayanihan at nararapat isama sila sa naratibo ng kabayanihan ng lahing Pilipino. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Professor Emeritus Maria Luisa T. Camagay. And before we officially end our program, may we now have a photo op together with our recent speakers. And to our dear participants, you may now open up your camera. We just have Make sure you turn on your camera and then smile. Let's start with our first batch. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And then moving on to the next one. 1, 2, 3. And next. 1, 2, 3. And then the last. And we're good. Thank you so much po sa inyong lahat at sa ating mga profesor mula po sa UP.
And now, once again, for those who are able to pre-register, we will be sending a link to your email. Kindly accomplish the evaluation forms and you will be receiving your e-certificate after a day. Kindly check your spam folder in case it was sent there instead of your inbox. And now, for the next episode of our Kagitingan webinar series, we have Dr. Ricardo C. Jose with Bataan Death March, Mr. Vicente Lim IV with the 601st Graves Registration Company and the American Battle Monuments Commission, and Dr. Marcelino Macapinlac with the guerrilla movement in South Luzon. This is on April 15, 2021 from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. We hope that all of you could join us again.
And that concludes our Bayani'Han Kuwentuhan ng Kabayanihan episode for today. This is our fourth webinar as part of the Kagitingan Historical Webinar Series 2021. We thank everyone for joining us this afternoon and we hope to see you on the next one. I am Maggie Grace Sahagoy.
And I am Nico Orero. We have been your hosts for today. Once again, maligayang buwan ng kababaihan sa inyong lahat. Kababaihan, bangon. Thank you and good afternoon.
Malilimutan, matitiyak.